1. Introduction. RAWSEP View. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable. Wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP View. Purple air. PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, or RAWSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RAWSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025 and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning, with the adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Episode 57 DHWR June 18, 2025. We just hit code red for US vaccine policy. In episode 57 DGWR1 RAWSEP View Trump talks like a mob boss / to green energy funds Republicans versus clean energy tax credits. We just hit code red for US vaccine policy. 2 headlines. 3 A 20-year-old registered Republican who shot at Trump in July 2024 and who was killed at the scene. The quiet unraveling of the men who almost killed Trump. 4 Alternatives to men as wood-fired grillers in summer. They are gentle, they are seasonal. 5 Democrats. Obama steps back into the public eye amid political and global unrest. 6 Medicine and science. Trump possible corruption. EPA plans to reconsider a ban on cancer causing asbestos. 7 Trump budget cuts to provide tax breaks for the rich. Senate Republicans propose key tax tweaks to House Bill 8. Trump budget cuts to provide tax breaks for the rich. The Senate Medicaid cuts and tax tweaks complicate path for the Trump policy. Bill 9 Assassination of Melissa Hortman and her husband on June 14, 2025. How the right spread brutal and cruel misinformation. After Minnesota lawmaker killings. Minnesota 10 Trump and G7 in Canada. Keir Starmer says he picked up the Trump dropped papers to avoid security scare. UK Prime Minister says it would not have been good for anyone else such as member of media to try to help main content. 1 RAWSEP View. The art of the deal appears to be extortion like a mob boss. Trump policies like tariffs are intended to start an extortionate dialogue where the victim ends up paying to an individual for what were previous rights. Is the elimination of clean energy sources meant to be a bargaining chip where whoever pays the most to Trump gets clean air, or is this a sweeping away of modern scientific and engineering marvels only because they were initiated under the Biden administration? 1A Trump talks like a mob boss. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. Substack letters from an American. Heather Cox Richardson June 18, 2025. Yesterday at the meeting of the leaders of the Group of 7 G7, a forum of democracies with advanced economies, President Donald Trump told reporters the UK is very well protected. You know why? Because I like them. That is why. That is the ultimate protection. Commenters often note that Trump talks like a mob boss, but rarely has his organized crime style of governance been clearer than in the statement yesterday. 1B/ to green energy funds. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. Public Broadcasting News. PBS News June 18, 2025. Green energy. A/ to green energy funds. The House and Senate are both moving to eliminate major tax credits for wind and solar from the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, but the Senate gives a slightly longer phase out, allowing a partial tax credit for projects that start construction next year or in 2027. The House would end the credit almost as soon as the bill is enacted. 1C Republicans versus clean energy tax credits. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times September 17, 2025. Climate activists and business leaders were watching to see if Republicans in the Senate would step up and support the clean energy industry, but when the Senate Finance Committee unveiled its draft of a sprawling domestic policy bill on Monday, June 16, 2025, it all but did away with most of the tax breaks for wind and solar power, electric vehicles and other clean energy solutions that were passed during the Biden administration. It appears that the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, the largest federal law designed to address climate change, will effectively be neutered. The executive director of the Solar Energy Manufacturers for America Coalition said the draft legislation undermines long-term American energy and economic security and presents a tremendous step backward for companies looking to move solar power production back to the United States. This bill would endanger hundreds of thousands of clean energy jobs and take food out of the mouths of millions of children. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, the leading Democrat on the Finance Committee, said Republican environmentalists also lamented the outcome. If enacted, Americans will pay more for energy, businesses will cancel key energy projects, and our nation will fall behind in the global energy race, said the president of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, a conservative environmental group. The fight, it was not for lack of trying by the supporters of the Inflation Recovery Act 1RA. For months now, a diverse coalition has lobbied Congress in hopes of preserving the clean energy tax credits that had unleashed an American manufacturing boom. The senior vice president of government affairs for the League of Conservation Voters said her organization had been working closely with Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, to rally support for the tax credits and make the case to Senate Republicans that while renewable energy is often vilified by President Trump, the jobs it creates are popular in Republican-led and Democratic-led states alike. We went from having been in the fight of our lives to pass the biggest ever investment in climate and clean energy and environmental justice to defending the biggest investment the world has ever seen in climate action, she said. A group of House Republicans had also worked to try and moderate the damage, joining forces with business groups, Democratic lawmakers and climate activists. These unlikely bedfellows were fighting for what they saw as a generational economic windfall since the Inflation Reduction Act was enacted in 2022. Companies have announced more than $841 billion in new clean energy investments, with a vast majority of that money flowing to Republican districts in the end, though the draft legislation that emerged from the Senate Finance Committee contained very little support for clean energy tax incentives for nuclear reactors, geothermal plants, hydropower dams, or battery storage would be preserved through 2033, but other credits, including those for electric vehicles, wind farms, solar installations, and batteries, would be rapidly phased out if enacted in anything like its current form. It will represent a rapid turnaround less than 3 years after President Biden signed into law the most ambitious federal effort to try and address climate change. President Trump and his allies in Congress have all but wiped it away. Amid all the other news lately, it might have been easy to miss Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s latest big move as health secretary, the firing and replacement of the committee of experts that advises the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on vaccines. In a guest essay for Times Opinion, the immunologist Dr. Michael Mina called it a code red moment for U.S. vaccine policy. 1D We just hit code red for U.S. vaccine policy, except edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 18, 2025. The recommendations of the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices help determine the vaccines doctors provide to patients and whether insurers will cover them. The Kennedy Jr. abrupt removal of all 17 members is a warning of what might be coming. A reconstituted committee will be in a position to more directly rearrange, alter, or dismantle the national vaccine schedule as it sees fit. Since last week, Kennedy announced 8 new committee members, including people who have spoken critically about vaccines. There are still more spots to fill, and the committee is scheduled to meet soon to discuss immunization for COVID-19, RSV, Lyme disease, human papillomavirus, and more. If the recommendation for a vaccine is withdrawn, patients who still opt to receive it could be left footing the bill. The committee shakeup is not the only change. The administration has also canceled contracts for the development of new vaccines and revised COVID vaccine guidance when once reliable guidance is muddied by conspiracy thinking. The risks to vaccines and the health of Americans increase. This is a precarious moment for vaccine policy. The damage may not be obvious until it is too late. 2A headlines. The New York Times, June 17, 2025. 20-year-old registered Republican Trump shooter in July 2024 who was killed at the scene. The quiet unraveling of the man who almost killed Trump. The New York Times. For alternatives to menace wood-fired grillers in summer, they are gentle, they are seasonal. The New York Times. Assassination of Melissa Hortman and her husband on June 14, 2025. Michael Lee draws outrage for posts blaming Minnesota assassination on far left. The New York Times. Assassination of Melissa Hortman and her husband on June 14, 2025. Suspect planned to inflict fear with wider killing spree, prosecutors say. The New York Times. Assassination of Melissa Hortman and her husband on June 14, 2025. Trump live updates. Lawmakers press for more security after Minnesota attacks. The New York Times. Assassination of Melissa Hortman and her husband on June 14, 2025. Trump says he has no plans to call wilds after shootings in Minnesota. The New York Times. 5 Democrats. Obama steps back into the public eye. Amid political and global unrest, the New York Times. Medicine and Science. Batcave footage offers clues to how viruses leap between species. The New York Times. 6 Medicine and Science. Trump possible corruption. EPA plans to reconsider a ban on cancer causing asbestos. The New York Times. Medicine and Science. Kraft Heinz to eliminate all chemical dyes over next 2 years. The New York Times. No Kings protest. June 14, 2025. 1 killed in shooting at No Kings protest in Salt Lake City. The New York Times. South Africa and Trump budget cuts to provide tax breaks for the rich. South Africa built a medical research powerhouse. Trump cuts have demolished at the New York Times. Trump actions in courts. American Bar Association sues Trump administration. The New York Times. Trump at G7 in Canada. At G7 summit with Trump. Starmer picks up papers and political wins for UK. The New York Times. Trump at G7 in Canada. At G7 Trump or news embrace of Putin amid rift with allies. The New York Times. Trump at G7 in Canada. Flattery or discipline, the difficult task of managing Trump. The New York Times. Trump at G7 in Canada. Trump says Macron always gets it wrong as they clash over Mideast. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts, the case for delaying your home renovation. The New York Times. 7 Trump budget cuts to provide tax breaks for the rich. Senate Republicans propose key tax tweaks to House bill. The New York Times. 8 Trump budget cuts to provide tax breaks for the rich. The Senate. Medicaid cuts and tax tweaks complicate path for the Trump policy bill. Live updates. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts to provide tax breaks for the rich. The Trump cuts to NIH grants focused on minority groups are illegal. Judge rules. The New York Times. Trump possible corruption, only non-violence will beat Trump. The New York Times. Trump possible corruption, opinion political violence is rising. This is what we can do to stop it. The New York Times. Trump possible corruption, opinion. This crypto act will return America to an era of economic chaos. The New York Times. Trump possible corruption, opinion. Trump has reawakened the resistance. The New York Times. Trump possible corruption, opinion. Trump is daring us to impeach him again. The New York Times. Trump possible corruption. Trump mobile phone company announced by president's family but details are murky. The New York Times. Ukraine and Russian aggression. North Korea will send 5,000 workers to Russia. Kremlin says. The New York Times. Ukraine Russian drone and missile strikes on Kyiv kill at least 10. The New York Times. United Kingdom lawmakers vote to decriminalize abortions for women in England and Wales. The New York Times. United Kingdom. UK spy agency MI6 appoints first female chief in 116-year history. The New York Times. Virginia Republicans fight uphill in a race for Virginia governor that will test anger at Trump. The New York Times. To the headlines. The Guardian. June 17, 2025. 9 Assassination of Melissa Hortman and her husband on June 14, 2025. How the right spread brutal and cruel misinformation after Minnesota lawmaker killings. Minnesota. The Guardian. Democrats, they got us into this. Indiana. Democrats says party leaders cannot lead. Fight back Democrats. The Guardian. Trump and freedom of speech to criticize the Trump administration. Fired ABC News journalist stands by his post criticizing Trump and advise ABC. The Guardian. Trump at G7 in Canada. It is the Donald Show, only without Donald Trump. Welcome to the G something or other summit. The Guardian. 10 Trump at G7 in Canada. Starmer says he picked up the Trump dropped papers to avoid security scare. Keir Starmer. The Guardian. Trump at G7 in Canada. Trump leaves Europe in the cold in the Rocky Mountains and Iran with a stark choice. Donald Trump. The Guardian. Trump possible corruption. I have never seen such open corruption. The Trump crypto deals and loosening of rules shock observers. Trump administration. The Guardian. A 20-year-old registered Republican who shot at Trump in July 2024 and who was killed at the scene. The quiet unraveling of the man who almost killed Trump. Thomas Phipps was a nerdy engineering student. He stockpiled explosive materials for months before his attack on Donald Trump as his mental health eroded. RAWSEP View. Republicans are searching like bots months later and then inventing possible conspiracies which only a Republican could find amusing, which could end up labeling violent and destructive Republicans as Democrats and funny to Republicans and unbelievably tortuous. Disguise. A registered Republican who liked guns and probably disliked gun control in line with the views of a typical Republican planned the assassination of Trump for over a year. Seems a straightforward story, but Republican-style conspiracy theories and talking points which over-dramatize the unsuccessful attempt point to the deep state with no evidence, like the bone spurs that kept Trump out of the military. The example of lies told by Trump when concocting the bone spur story probably tends to draw liars to Trump as acolytes. The Trump-style liar acolytes are primed to live on conspiracy theories when a straightforward story of a gun nut with mental health issues looking for glory by choosing a famous subject is the probable underlying truth of this twisted Republican on Republican man-on-man unsuccessful violent attempt which failed to kill Trump but in the process killed a different Republican human being. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 8, 2025. Thomas Crooks was acting strangely. Sometimes he danced around his bedroom late into the night, other times he talked to himself with his hands waving around. These unusual behaviors intensified last summer after he graduated with high honors from a community college. He also visited a shooting range, grew out his thin brown hair, and searched online for major depressive disorder and depression crisis. His father noticed the shift. Mental health problems ran in the family. On the afternoon of July 13, 2024, Crooks told his parents he was heading to the gun range and left home with a rifle. Hours later, he mounted a roof at a presidential campaign rally in western Pennsylvania and unsuccessfully tried to assassinate Trump. Investigators later found a crude homemade bomb inside his bedroom not far from where his parents slept on the night of the shooting. Matthew Crooks told federal agents that he had been concerned about the visits of his son to the gun club. A really intelligent kid, he did not socialize much but came out of his shell in a technology program in which he built computers. One high school classmate said Crooks enjoyed talking about the economy and cryptocurrencies, a typical Republican interest, encouraging others to invest on the rare occasions when the conversation turned to politics. He seemed to be in the middle of the road. When Crooks turned 18 in the fall of 2021, he registered as a Republican. The political affiliations of his family were as diverse as the swing state of Pennsylvania they lived in. His sister and his father were registered as Libertarians and his mother was a Democrat. RAWSEP interjection: 3 out of 4 in the family registered as conservative or Republican in the objective eyes of the editor of RAWSEP. Back to the article. In the summer of 2024, the FBI released findings suggesting that Crooks had been planning an attack for over a year. The next month, the agency said Crooks had begun searching online about how to make explosives as early as 2019. When he was 16 years old, investigators said they had not uncovered a motive or any co-conspirators. In the absence of new information, conspiracy theories about Crooks have grown. Some have claimed that he had an accomplice or that he was an agent of the so-called deep state, which Republicans view as Democratic. A woman who lives across the street from the Crooks house said another theory floating around claimed that she and other neighbors built underground tunnels to aid the Crooks shooting. Helen Compertor, an avid Trump supporter whose husband Corey was killed by Crooks, still wants to know more. I am praying Trump keeps working on this case for me and him, she said. For alternatives to men as wood-fired grillers in summer, they are gentle, they are seasonal. These charismatic chefs are on social media counter to the harder-edged chefs. The Jonah Reader gentle style of cooking and thoughtful market-driven dishes. RAWSEP View all hyper-manly pumped up fears about cancel of the arduous cosplay weekend projects of cooking by men. Gasp. Are true. Men get all dolled up to cook over burning wood, and in doing so a few days a year relieve women of the routine, efficient and daily expertise of cooking indoors, and then the sweating men are usurped in the affection of the public by veggie eaters. They, the others like the editor of RAWSEP, want to take your smoky grills away. Embrace the vegetable and soy products and clean air when cooking, and for God's sake clean up that grill, or at least stop using wood to burn on your persnickety pool of soot and dirt encrusted infernal hellscape grill. RAWSEP tip: women can cook too. Women often cook competently, quietly and without fanfare the dishes that nourish and please a nation, not just on the 4th of July. And women probably cook indoors without polluting the kitchen air, because that would be counterproductive. Except edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 16, 2025. The British chef Julius Roberts has videos on Instagram where he showcases his idyllic farm life and seemingly effortless seasonal cooking. Then I kept seeing them youngish men whose cooking on TikTok and Instagram felt gentle, understated and sincere. Although chefy on social media, these sensitive men with charisma are heartthrob boy next door and devoted to food. They are not purposefully slamming ingredients down on the counter, haphazardly throwing things into pots. Instead they nurture, produce rather than contort it into foams. Tomatoes are holidays dessert. His fruit in contrast, hypermasculine cooking online snatches your attention online with excessive portions, aggressive editing and thunderous noise. In his senior year at Columbia University, Jonah Reader started a supper club out of his dorm room that landed him on late night television and got him written up in media outlets rather than pursue a career as a restaurant chef. Jonah Reader, now 31, said he would peek at dishes through dining room windows and then interpret them in his own kitchen. A former BuzzFeed video producer, Pierce Abernathy, left his day job to cook at a restaurant full-time in 2019 and started posting online cooking videos a year later. Pierce Abernathy, a model and social media star cook, cites his mother as a major influence. "I was lucky to have a mom that cooked very simply," he said, preparing food like fish sautéed in olive oil with lemon, a little salt, and steamed broccoli that tasted like broccoli tasted. The road to cooking gently was a long one for Abernathy, aged 31, a former BuzzFeed video producer. He left his day job to cook at a restaurant full-time in 2019, but it was not until he moved back home to Kentucky during the pandemic that he felt comfortable enough to be himself in front of the camera. "Just a guy who loves cooking vegetables." Now he has hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok, where he posts quiet videos of himself turning peak produce from the farmer's market into dips, salads, and other vegetable-forward delights. "When I interviewed Pierce Abernathy, I was struck by how much he was like his online presence." 5 Democrats. Obama steps back into the public eye amid political and global unrest. Obama steps back into public eye at a stormy political moment. He will appear on Tuesday evening, June 24, 2025 in Hartford, Connecticut, alongside the writer Heather Cox Richardson, at a time of deep volatility for his party, the country, and the world. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 17, 2025. Former President Barack Obama will gingerly step into the public fray on Tuesday night after weeks of quiet grumbling from some demoralized Democrats for his silence in the face of an assault on liberal America by Trump. Obama will participate in a discussion in Hartford, Connecticut with Heather Cox Richardson, a popular liberal writer and historian. A Democratic state lawmaker in Minnesota and her husband were assassinated in shootings that wounded another Democratic legislator, and his wife Obama is busy writing the second volume of his memoir. He is producing television shows and documentaries through his company Higher Ground, which recently released a documentary on the elite pilots of the Air Force Thunderbirds, and he is preparing for the opening of his presidential center in Chicago, scheduled for the spring of 2026. The privately run museum will contain digital copies of some of the Obama papers and private discussions. Obama has praised his Democratic Party bench of leaders in state houses and in Congress, saying a new generation must lead Democrats into the future. He has compared this moment to early 2005, when he arrived in the Senate with Democrats out of power in Washington. In the 2006 midterm elections, Democrats gained control of Congress, and 2 years after that he became the first black president of America and re-energized the party. 6 Medicine and Science. EPA plans to reconsider a ban on cancer-causing asbestos. The Trump move sets back a decades-long effort to end the use of the material, which is widely banned in other countries. RAWSEP View again is the only reason for Trump actions to erase scientific and medical progress, or making a mob-like threats to human health that could be countered by potential victims succumbing to Trump extortion and making Trump a personal monetary offer in exchange for protecting human health. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 17, 2025. The Trump administration plans to reconsider a ban on the last type of asbestos still used in the United States, according to a court filing on Monday. The move, which could halt enforcement of the ban for several years during the reconsideration, is a major blow to a decades-long battle by health advocates to prohibit the carcinogenic mineral in all its forms, known as white asbestos. Chrysotile asbestos is banned in more than 50 countries for its link to lung cancer and mesothelioma, a cancer that forms in the lining of internal organs. White asbestos, however, has been imported for use in the United States for roofing materials, textiles and cement, as well as gaskets, clutches, brake pads and other automotive parts. It is also used in chlorine manufacturing. Last year, the Environmental Protection Agency under President Joseph R. Biden adopted a ban on the use, manufacture and import of chrysotile asbestos. It was the first legal constraint on a deadly substance since 2016, when Congress updated and strengthened the 1976 Toxic Substances Control Act by requiring testing and regulation of thousands of chemicals used in everyday products. The measure would have still allowed some manufacturers up to 12 years to phase out its use, a provision that followed lobbying efforts by trade groups like the American Chemistry Council. Now the Trump administration administration plans to delay the ban and reconsider the rule. That process is expected to take about 30 months, the EPA said in a filing with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has been reviewing an industry challenge to the rule. The delay would move the nation backward once again, putting lives at risk, said the president and co-founder of the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization and advocacy nonprofit. Asbestos is a set of 6 naturally occurring fibrous minerals that have the ability to resist heat, fire and electricity. Is linked to an estimated 40,000 deaths annually in the United States. It was first used in construction in the 1930s and became ubiquitous as an insulator in schools, hospitals, homes and offices, as well as consumer products in the 1960s and 1970s. Researchers began to associate it with health problems including mesothelioma, rare and aggressive cancer that disproportionately affects firefighters exposed to asbestos through damaged buildings. Asbestos production in the United States stopped in 2002, but the material is still imported, much of it from Brazil. The presence of asbestos in older homes added to the health risks for firefighters battling the California wildfires this year. A bill introduced by Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, in 2023 would ban imports of all asbestos. It has not been introduced in this session. Senator Merkley said he would continue to explore all options, including legislation to phase out all dangerous asbestos fibers and provide stronger protections for our health. 7 Trump budget cuts to provide tax breaks for the rich. Senate Republicans propose key tax tweaks to House Bill X, substituted by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 17, 2025. 2 weeks after the House adopted a sprawling package of tax cuts, Senate Republicans on Monday unveiled their legislative vision, proposing a series of tweaks that would primarily enhance the benefits provided to businesses. The legislative text released by the Senate Finance Committee mirrors in broad strokes the effort the House adopted. Both aim to extend a set of tax cuts on individuals and corporations that will soon expire, which President Trump signed into law during his first term and has pushed to expand in his second. In short, the Senate measure offers bigger tax benefits for corporations as well as older Americans. It would also change the way that party lawmakers aim to deliver on the Trump promises to end taxes on tips and overtime. More generous corporate tax breaks in a major win for businesses. Senate Republicans propose to make permanent a set of generous deductions for research and development and other expenses, including machinery purchases. The House proposed to extend these measures, which were set to expire at the end of the year, but only on a temporary basis, as Republicans in the House looked for ways to shave costs from their already expensive legislation. The legislation includes substantial changes to Medicaid and cuts to other safety net programs, along with reductions of some federal spending, all of which could lower the total cost of the bill. Nonpartisan budget watchdogs found the full measure passed by the House could add $3 trillion to the debt over the next decade. The Senate also proposed to make permanent a 20% deduction for pass-through income, which is business income taxed at the individual rates of an owner, though it is less generous than the 23% deduction proposed in the House. Changes to taxes for families. Every year taxpayers can opt for what is called the standard deduction, a flat amount they can claim on their taxes so that they do not have to itemize every expense. Senate Republicans proposed a permanent one-time $1,000 increase for individuals and $2,000 for married filers, taking effect in the 2026 tax year, while their House counterparts would offer the extra amounts but only through 2028. Otherwise, Republicans in both chambers would preserve the lower tax brackets that they set up under Trump in 2017 as they look to stave off what would otherwise be a tax increase beginning next year. 8 Trump budget cuts to provide tax breaks for the richest. Senate bill would make deep cuts to Medicaid, setting up a fight with the House, substituted by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 17, 2025. Senate Republicans on Monday released legislation that would cut Medicaid far more aggressively than would the House passed bill to deliver President the Trump domestic agenda, while also salvaging or slowing the elimination of some clean energy tax credits, setting up a fight over the Republican Party marquee policy package. But the Senate bill differences with the House bill are substantial and complicate the Senate measure path to enactment, casting doubt on that timetable of July 4 passage. The Senate proposal is slower and has a less sweeping approach to phasing out clean energy tax credits created during the Biden administration and would cover part of the cost, with deeper and more expansive cuts to Medicaid. Senate Republicans focused on a popular element of the measure, its extension of tax cuts that were enacted in 2017 and are set to expire at the end of the year. A $7,500 tax credit for buyers of electric cars would phase out immediately within 180 days of the bill passing into law. This bill prevents an over $4 trillion tax hike and makes the successful 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent, but the changes in the Senate bill could make final passage in the House more difficult. The House version of the legislation sought to make good on the Trump campaign promise to eliminate taxes on Social Security benefits by instead creating a bonus $4,000 deduction available to Americans 65 and older, with the benefit shrinking at higher income levels. The Senate bill would grant them a $6,000 tax deduction. The provisions proposed by the Senate would increase the debt limit by $5 trillion. The House passed bill called for lifting it by $4 trillion, a move that was expected to allow the nation to continue borrowing money through the 2026 midterm elections. 9. Assassination of Melissa Hortman and her husband on June 14, 2025. How the right spread brutal and cruel misinformation after Minnesota lawmaker killings. The right-wing media ecosystem spins up narratives to serve their agendas after tragic events regardless of accuracy. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, June 17, 2025. Tina Smith, a Minnesota senator, confronted Mike Lee, a Utah senator, on Monday to tell him directly that his social media posts fueled ongoing misinformation about a shooting that killed her friend. The Mike Lee posts, which advanced conspiracies that a Minnesota assassin was a Marxist and blamed the Minnesota governor for the Melissa Hortman death, were among many threads of false or speculative claims swirling online after the killings. Smith told Lee his posts were brutal and cruel. According to CNN, he should think about the implications of what he's saying and doing. It just further fuels this hatred and misinformation. She said she wanted him to hear from her directly how painful it was to see his words after the brutality her state endured. Lee did not say much according to Smith and seemed surprised to be confronted within hours of the shootings. Right-wing social media accounts with millions of followers manufactured false conspiracy theories about the suspect and his motives, falsely portraying the man whose friends say he is an evangelical Christian Trump supporter as a radical left-wing assassin and attempting to paint him as a political ally of Tim Walz, the Democratic governor and former vice presidential candidate. Right-wing ex-user Viva Fry, with more than 700,000 followers, posted a thread casting doubt on Bolter being a Trump supporter. The account has continued to post about the shootings, attempting to tie Walz to Bolter and his wife Jennifer. A different Jennifer Bolter interned in the Walz congressional office, though Fry has not accepted that fact. On Monday, posts showing a man at a protest with a shirt with a gun that says "Resist" falsely claim the man was Bolter yelled, "Sorry, he is one of you. Keep saying he is not. No one believes you." The actual man in the picture debunked it, saying he was at a No Kings rally in Texas in the photo, making clear it was not Bolter. Local Republican officials have largely not contributed to the rumors, in some cases pushing back on the narratives. Harry Niska, the Republican floor leader in the Minnesota House, said on X that he often has and will continue to criticize Walz's policies and rhetoric, but there is no responsible basis to attribute to him any of the evil acts committed by Vance Bolter, he said. 10. Trump and G7 in Canada. Keir Starmer says he picked up the Trump-dropped papers to avoid security scare. UK Prime Minister says it would not have been good for anyone else, such as member of media, to try to help RAWSEP View. Another example of Trump ineptitude, stupidity and incompetence endangering national security, or possibly a Trump diversion from substantively discussing policy. In an appearance with Starmer, excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, June 17, 2025. Keir Starmer said he rushed to pick up papers dropped by Donald Trump at the G7 summit in Canada, mainly to avoid anyone else stepping forward to do so and being tackled by the Trump security team. Speaking to reporters in Kananaskis a day after Trump fumbled some of the documents about a UK-US trade deal, letting a sheaf of papers tumble to the ground, Starmer said he had little choice but to bend down and help out. The UK Prime Minister said said look, there were not many choices with the documents and picking it up, because as you probably know there were quite strict rules about who can get close to the president. Seriously, I think if any of you the media had stepped forward other than me, I was just deeply conscious that in a situation like it would not have been good for anybody else to have stepped forward. Not that any of you rushed to. There is a very tightly guarded security zone around the president, as you would expect.
Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. Saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies which we will post for her here.
Hi, I am Leone. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your local epidemiologist. The Midas Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times.
One introduction. RAWSEP View. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP View. Purple air. PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.